Hello, Burbankers. Welcome back to the Mike and Roy Show. We're branching out, trying a new kind of version of our shows. And what we're doing, we're inviting each of the candidates that are up for election of the Burbank City Council coming up here in a few months to be a guest here on the Mike and Roy Show. And we have a series of 10 questions that we have come up with and some other neighbors. And Greg Sousa is with us tonight, one of the candidates. And Mike, you want to start with the first question?
Sure. Thanks, Greg, for coming to join us and answering our questions that, like Roy said, are concerns for lots of Burbank residents. And we'd just like to see how you feel about these questions and how you answer them.
All right.
And the first question we came up with was, what do you love most about Burbank?
Well, when I first moved here 20 years ago, what I loved about Burbank was it was close to work. It was close to everything. I could drive down to Hollywood and get Thai food at 3 o'clock in the morning, or I could be at work in 15 minutes. I could be out of town in half an hour, and it was really a convenient place to live, and it was relatively safe and quiet. But what I have come to realize now is that it's really much more special as a place for my son to grow up and for him to flourish and realize his full potential. It has amenities and activities here that you just wouldn't find in any other place. So we have an equestrian center, we have an ice skating rink, we have parks, we have Little League, we have really good schools, and it just has turned out to be an ideal place to raise a child, and that's really what I love most about Burbank.
Thanks.
Great. Greg, can you tell us why you are running for city council?
Well, I did not set out initially to run for city council, but when I became aware of the various large-scale projects that were in the developmental pipeline, and I saw some of the plans for 9-story buildings that were going to be put in on First Street, when I saw the plans to put in multi-story buildings on the Magnolia and Burbank corridors, it really caught my attention, and I realized that there were things coming our way that would change the character of this community and would affect us for years to come. Because after all, when you start pouring concrete for a building, you're literally setting that plan in stone. And I realized that the pendulum had swung far in the direction of the development momentum, and that if we were going to see the pendulum swing the other way, somebody was going to have to step up, and that's why I decided to run for council.
We all know that it's a huge time commitment being a city council member. How much time do you see yourself reading each week to prepare for the city council meeting?
Based on what I've seen of the agenda that the council usually deals with, I would expect to have to read at least 4 hours a week, and not all at once, but it's sometimes surprising how long it takes to get through some dense, complicated issues. I found this out in law school. I spent much of the last few years in law school, and there are times when you're lucky to get through 12 pages in an hour. But on the other hand, now that I've graduated, I don't have that burden in front of me, so I would have more time to devote to that kind of reading. But I would say, 4 hours would be probably an average. Some weeks, of course, there would be less, and some weeks, of course, there would be more. But it's as you've surmised, it's a sizable burden. It's a serious responsibility, because certainly you can't just show up at the meetings and make sound decisions without having done your homework.
Greg, what's your impression of the current city council? And if you were elected, what kind of changes would you like to see happen there?
Well, my impression of the current city council is that while they may in fact mean well, they are not always prepared to deal with the issues that come their way, and it's not always their fault. We've seen recently where the council has to rely heavily, as they often do, on outside experts primarily the city attorney. And
Attorney, yeah.
and I feel that the council at times relies too much on staff reports, on outside auditors, and especially on the city attorney, who do not always give them all the information that they need to make sound policy. And I would not say that the council is necessarily remiss in their obligations, but there are times when you need to dig beyond what the staff report says. You need to gather information outside of what the experts tell you. And sadly, I would have to say that if there's one thing I would change, it would be that the council needs better legal advice. They're not getting sound legal counsel from the city attorney. We've all seen meetings where the city attorney will answer a question, and I'm sure we've all sat there and we've said, "What was that? I don't feel any more informed than I did before she answered the question." And let me tell you, part of that is just inherent in explaining legal issues to the average person. It is difficult to explain some legal issues to, the average council member, but sadly, I'm afraid that our city attorney is not very good at doing that very thing, and that's the primary purpose of her being at those meetings, is to be able to make the complicated concepts of law understandable to the average council member. And so if you've sat there and listened to the city attorney explain things and were left scratching your head, it's not you. In my opinion, those questions just were not answered adequately. So if there's one thing I would change with the city council, I would say we would need to look at getting better legal counsel for the council.
Greg, can you share your thoughts about the Tellurium Project?
Well, the Tellurium Project, let me hand this off before it starts. The alarm's going to go off on that soon, so it's on snooze right now. The Tellurium Project, whether you are for or against the Tellurium Project, my problem with this project, as with many other things that we've seen in recent years, is not the substance of the project. And certainly there are questions and concerns about the substance of it. How are we going to absorb so many new housing units when we haven't made improvements in our infrastructure? The elementary school, Stevenson, which is going to have to absorb any kids that live in the Tellurium building, is pretty impacted as it is. They're already working out of modular classrooms, and I don't think that much concern was given to how we would absorb more students. But really, the bigger issue that I have with it is procedural things. For instance, there were streets that were connecting Olive to Alameda, and those streets were virtually given away to the developer for a song, because they were they were described by city staff as remnants of streets. But we all know that when you put those streets together with the property that now forms the footprint of the Tellurium Project, the streets were much more valuable than what we were paid for them. It's kind of like with the former police station on Olive Avenue across from City Hall. Well, that was sold to a developer for $100, who turned around, put a building on it, and turned around and sold it for many, many millions of dollars. And the city got out of that whole transaction $100. So whether the Tellurium Project in the end will be a positive contribution to Burbank, and that's yet to be seen, I believe that procedurally it could have been done better, and that's really the objection I have to Tellurium.
Greg, can you please define your position on some of the scandals that have plagued our police department here in Burbank, and the current status where we are right now with BPT?
Well, my position on that is that right now the Burbank Police Department is under a lot of scrutiny in between the FBI, the auditor, and citizens like you and I who keep a close eye on things. We don't see a lot of the gross corruption that we would see in, say, some place like New Orleans or some of these cities that are notorious for having just out of control police departments. I'm not entirely sure that we have the gold standard police department that was described in the audit report, but I think we can all agree that the perception, at least, is that our police department is understaffed. And whether that's true or not, we really don't know, because we don't get a lot of discussion on that. But what we do know is that when we call for routine service here in the city of Burbank, when we pick up the phone and we say, we have a suspicious car sitting outside in our neighborhood, we have a stolen bicycle, we have a routine police issue, that we don't get service in a timely manner because we're told by the dispatchers there are no officers available. Another, if you want to call it a scandal, another issue that arose with the Burbank police was the recent lawsuit by a man who applied as a dispatcher. And he was basically not hired because, as he alleged, because of sexual discrimination. Now, it's not so much the sexual discrimination that is an issue for me, it's the closed nature of the dispatching unit. It seems almost like, again, when you call for service, that you are put through 20 questions to decide whether or not your situation truly deserves police service. And so if there's a situation I think that we need to look at, besides the understaffing of our police department, it's this situation where when one calls for service, that one's kind of put off and delayed in getting the response that you might otherwise expect.
Greg, we recently had an issue in a recent election that was controversial, and we want to ask you, do you have any qualms about how Measure B was presented to Burbank residents in this recent election?
I do. And as I said before, for me, procedure matters as much as the substance of the question itself. I had an issue with Measure B being put on the November ballot. I feel that an informed voter is really the linchpin of our democratic system. And if you are putting a ballot measure like Measure B, which had a lot of variables and really needed some serious consideration, if you put that in the November ballot underneath the presidential election, underneath a senatorial election, our local congressman was up for re-election, and then there was something like 17 ballot measures as well. If you slip it in underneath all those, how much time does the average resident of Burbank have to get down to the nitty-gritty on Measure B? And I had a serious problem with that. We have our own municipal elections. That's what we're looking at right now is our Burbank city elections. And why not have Measure B be part of that? This was a question that was only presented to Burbank voters. It was only for us to vote on. So why not put it on the one ballot that just goes to Burbank voters in April and give us all a chance to really delve into it and figure it out? So that was my first concern with Measure B. It may seem to some that this was a minor issue. Some were saying on social media, so what? The measure would have passed anyway. But really, if you think about it, what separates us from a banana republic, makes us different, is that we have strong institutions, we have due process of law, and we do things in an orderly way in which gives everybody a chance to be heard and to have their concerns addressed. Now, Measure B might have very well passed in April by the same margin that it passed in November, but I think the citizens of Burbank would have had a far greater sense of ownership of the question, would have far more pride in the outcome, would be far more willing to point to the new terminal as a source of pride had they felt that the process was not somehow cheapened by moving it into the November ballot, and then, as we later found out, by the questionable expenditure of public funds on promoting that election. Not just promoting the election, I should say, but promoting Measure B itself.
Well, that leads us kind of perfectly to the next question, and I'm going to read this one, glasses on. Recently, Burbank resident and Save Burbank Neighborhoods member, David Spell, broke the news of corruption in Burbank in regards to a very serious election fraud scandal. While he was revealing this scandal to our city council in his 5 minutes of public comment, 2 council members were texting and typing and couldn't be bothered even to look up to acknowledge him. How do you feel about this?
Yeah, I was at that meeting. Well, it's unfortunate. And of course, I think that what this revealed is that when you watch the meetings on the Burbank channel, you don't always see everything that goes on at the meeting. And I think that perhaps our council members were complacent in that. And so, they were not paying, I believe, the proper attention. As I said before, one definition of integrity is what you do while no one's watching. And I think that, we saw a glimpse of that. On the other hand, though, there were 2 other council members up there who, may profess their concern, may profess their misgivings about the way Measure B was handled. But when they had a chance to actually act upon it, they failed. And so really, what's more, what's the bigger problem? Somebody who openly seems apathetic about it, or somebody who feigns concern but then really does nothing when the time comes. Mm-hmm. So but I think the takeaway from it is, if you really want to see how your council conducts business, you should come to the meetings.
And on the same subject, Greg, what do you think of the misappropriation of $50,000 of taxpayer money that was donated by the Burbank Hospitality Association to the Yes on Measure B campaign? And do you plan on getting that money back for Burbank taxpayers?
I think it's imperative that we move to get that money back. I think that the solution that was put forward by the city attorney is completely inadequate. Here's why. When the people of Burbank, through their elected representatives, authorized the collection of a tax, and make no mistake about it, the money that is collected from the individual hotels as part of the business improvement district, that is a tax. Those hotels don't have a choice as to whether or not to pay that. They may have voluntarily joined the business improvement district, but some of them may not. And in any event, if they don't pay that tax when it's due, they get assessed penalties and interest on that. So it's not voluntary. So when the people of Burbank authorized the use of the city's authority to collect a tax to make certain improvements to the business climate here, they expected those improvements to be made to the business climate. Instead, that money was diverted to a political campaign. Now, for the city attorney to recommend that we simply declare a tax holiday for X amount of days in order to relieve those hotels of that tax burden to the tune of $50,000, it may benefit the hotels that pay into that tax, but it doesn't benefit the people of Burbank who authorized that tax for a specific purpose and did not realize the benefit of that purpose when that tax was misappropriated on a political purpose. So absolutely we need to move to recover that $50,000. Could you refresh my memory on the rest of the question?
That was it. You answered the question. Just how you felt about that misappropriation, and you plan on getting that money back.
Okay.
And you answered
well,
it.
the other part of it, though, is how I feel about the misappropriation. And I would refer you back to my previous comments where, again, the difference between us and a banana republic is that we have rules, we have strong institutions, and we abide by the rule of law, and we don't tolerate shortcuts in how our government operates. And when you allow the incumbency, when you allow the keeper of the public purse to divert funds for a purpose that is contrary to due process, in this case, to promote a political cause. I mean, our courts have recognized this. They have said that to allow such a thing subverts the intention of a free election. Instead of having an expression of the will of the voters, you have an expression of the will of those already in office. And so I can't stress enough, this was not just a clerical error. This was not just a administrative mistake, or as one person at council described it, as a whoopsie. This was a serious transgression of some of our basic principles of fair elections, and it should be taken seriously. And we should not just move on and get over it. This is something that has to be looked into, has to be remedied, and we have to make sure that it doesn't happen again.
Thank you. So this is kind of another meaty question here. It seems that much of the present city council is courting developers rather than representing the very residents who voted them in. How do you plan, if elected, to balance the future growth of Burbank with residents' desire to maintain our small town legacy?
Every community needs to have a balance of business and residential. Otherwise, you become lopsided. And we've all heard of bedroom communities. We can all look at places like, City of Vernon, for instance, where there are practically no residents at all, and no one would ever want to live there because it's all business. But in a community like ours, and most communities, you want to have a healthy balance of business and residential. And my feeling is that the pendulum has swung toward the business interest for quite a while now. We've seen a lot of development. We've seen the Empire Center go up. We're seeing Tellurium go up. We've seen the development of the Golden Mall. It's been a really good period for the business interests in the community, and that can be a good thing. But what you need after each period of development like that is you need a period of recovery and adjustment for the community. When I was in the military, part of the training regimen was you had cycles. You trained hard for a while. You might have a deployment, but after an intense cycle like that, you would have a period where the unit was allowed to recover and adjust and bring in new people. And what we see here is that the pendulum again has swung so far over to the development interests that I'm afraid that our residential interests have been left behind in that. And so we see the increase in traffic. We see the developments in our community that seem to forget the residents. And as your question implies, there are some who feel that that the council simply does not properly consider residential interests when making decisions that are going to affect us all for a long time.
Well, we'd like to thank you for joining us and for agreeing to answer our questions and being interviewed, and we wish you all the best.
Well, thank you.
In the upcoming election. There's one more very important question before we go, Greg. Indians or Bulldogs?
Well, this is going to sound like a really political answer.
Choose it very carefully, your answer.
Well, we happen to live in that little slice of Burbank where my son can go to either high school.
Ooh.
And so maybe this gives me a convenient way of answering this question. But I am going to see where my son wants to go to high school. And I will support him in that decision, and we'll see how that goes.
All right, so we know Greg is very non-committal.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thanks for doing this. We really appreciate it. All the best.
Thank you for having me.
Good luck.
This is Mike and Roy, and we'll see you with another candidate.